Well, welcome, and welcome to all those who are online, and a very special welcome to our youngest member, who is, I think, a few months old, from Indonesia. It is getting difficult to get into this university. You need to apply early, but this is the earliest application we've had so far. Anyway, the annual Hugh Bunting Memorial Lecture. Professor Hugh Bunting was my professor of agricultural botany when I was here. Part of his education was at Wits, and I'm sure he would have been delighted with the rugby result, which most of us here were on the edge of our seats, hoping England would hang on. But anyway, we do wish the Springboks well next weekend. Anyway, Hugh Bunting became actually Professor of Overseas Agricultural Development. That was a personal chair in, I think, 1974. And certainly when we used to go to see him, he had a notice on his door. Well, he had a very congenial secretary once you got to know her, but she had an office ahead of his office. So you had to get past his secretary in order to see the professor. But if he was reading a PhD thesis or a special research report, he had a notice which simply said, "The professor is reading." And you knew you had to go away. Now, some of his more mischievous colleagues said, "No, it's the professor is ready." It's a takeover bid. Anyway, but he had a great dynamism in overseas development, and he was very instrumental, actually, in forming the TAA. In 1979, he was one of the movers and shakers, linked with the association that goes back more than 100 years, the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture, now part of the University of the West Indies, which celebrated its centenary 2 years ago. Anyway, it is my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker for this lecture, Professor Zeremariam Fre. And Zeremariam left Eritrea as a refugee. He came to this country. Many of his fellow countrymen at that time, we're talking the 1970s, they went straight into the heart of London. He said, "No, I'm a rural man. I want to learn rural things." So he studied horticulture. Then he said, "I want to not study plant pots. I want to go a bit bigger than that. I want to go to fields." So he went to the Royal Agricultural College, the Royal Agricultural University, studied there, and that's where I met him. And then he came here and did his master's in agricultural extension. He did so well in that he did his PhD here, and he has now become professor of in the development unit, the Bartlett Development Planning Unit of University College London. And I guess all of us have heard of UCL, and I was saying to him earlier, I think they have a very good PR department. And I think the BBC has a hotline to them, because just no matter what topic comes into the news, somebody from UCL will have been researching it or will have an up-to-date comment, which is salutary and good. So Professor Fre has written a number of books. He's got the launch of his latest book, which he co-edited, on social protection, pastoralism, and resilience, and that is happening next month. But he was honoured for his work in setting up, in 1989, Penha. And I told him to bring along the patron, but he hasn't. That is Joanna Lumley. And Joanna Lumley is also a patron of the Gurkhas, as some of us know. But anyway, Penha has been going then for 34 years. And because of the network effectiveness in bringing together peoples of different nationalities and in conflict zones, actually the Desmond Tutu Foundation recognized him, and he's a fellow of that foundation, for his community cohesion work, shall we say. So tonight's lecture, you can see the title there, I won't repeat it. He has been working for more than 30 years with marginalised people and has a wealth of experience. So I give you Professor Zeremariam Fre. Thank you.
I think think what John has forgotten also, he was a very good teacher to us in Royal Agricultural College. Part of the reason I'm here is because of him. So, guys, first of all, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Am I loud enough? Yeah. It's my pleasure because I was a student here, and it's very good to see the younger generation of students like this, like yourself, and also, of course, the professor here. I'm very happy to be part of this discussion. Well, I represent the region. Our region is the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, South Sudan, Djibouti. There are 8 countries in the region. I feel part of them all because I think that region has a shared civilization as far as I'm concerned, you know. Great things have happened in the past, and I'm optimistic that will happen again in our region. It's not that, although at the moment it's quite desperate and conflict zone, but I think it will rise up again, and I'm an optimist, you know, otherwise you cannot survive in our region. If you're a pessimist, you have to go somewhere else. So I think what as John kindly said, the pastoral peoples in our region in general, I'm not going to take some negative approach to it because they are part of the wider communities in the Horn of Africa, you know. Their marginalization is part of the wider neglect of the rural life in our countries. So what I will do today is, as a matter of fact, if I may just remember, we come from oral traditions, you know, in our part of the world, so I have to be very careful, and you can just remind me to keep. So the title suggests it's a Horn reflection, Horn of Africa reflection. And I think, sorry, yeah, can you hear me okay? So what I will do is, what I'll do is just we go through the, sorry, I hope you can look at these notes. What I try to do is just to give you a very brief idea. Firstly, of all, I would like to introduce our region as a home, our home, and indicate to you the shared history and the values of the region. And secondly, the pastoral systems are part of built into that society, as far as I'm concerned, because you've got farmers, you've got fishermen, women, you know. So pastoralism is only one of the various modes of protection in our region. Then I am very fond of pastoralist knowledge systems on the socio-economic contribution of those communities. Because I think very often, if we train in a place like Reading, I'm sorry, another institute, you know, you get a bit brainwashed with the Green Revolution technologies, and you know, you forget your own. And in this evening, I'm going to stress we have a fantastic type of livestock in our region, and I will demonstrate it, at least visually. I wrote a book about indigenous knowledge systems, so you can access it. And then we're going to go into the actual challenges which are facing these communities, again, along with other communities in the region, because you have a conflict, you know, it doesn't take up on the pastoralists, everyone else is affected. That's my view, including urban communities. Then I want to discuss what are the emerging livelihood systems. Any one of you have been in a rural life, you change, you know, through time, through education, through opportunities. So the pastoralist communities are not dormant either. There's a lot of changes internally, and we finished a very interesting work in Ethiopia recently, a group of us, on the social protection intervention by the government in the last few years. So we just published a book on it, and it's very important to look at pastoralists as part of the society, at the same time criticize the government interventions, you know. Finally, what are these adaptive opportunities? How are these communities changing? And then I'll be concluding just in terms of what I think could be done about the situation. So this is briefly what I would talk about. And I'll try to be as reasonable and fast as possible. Now, the region of ours, what we call Horn of Africa, I'm sure some of you know, the 7-8 countries I mentioned. It's about 230 million altogether as a region. 5 million square kilometers. Ecological diversity also affects the livelihood of various communities. If you are in highland Ethiopia, highland Eritrea, or highland Sudan, then your livelihood is, you are becoming mixed farmer by design, you know, adjusting yourself to the environment. I also a great believer in the culture of diversities, religions, and digital civilization. I'm very proud to say that our region, in fact, has a long, long civilization, despite the current issues, unfortunately. It is strategic significance. Remember, it's close to the Middle East, all those big powers. The Arabs, perhaps during the Soviet era, there were American interests as well. Now China is coming, not only economically, but also militarily along the coast. There's a presence. And the Middle East powers like, Turkey and others. So we are in that kind of, I call it some kind of curse, to be strategically prepared. I wish we were further south in the Congo, far away from all this. Because our area is very attractive, for superpowers, unfortunately, one way or the other. And I wanted to give you that. And then, of course, I'm sorry if there is any Somali among you here. I don't mean speaking up on the Somalis, but I think the failure of the Somali Republic a few years ago has created a situation of a failed state where there was piracy along the coasts, and then I think gave us a very bad name, because then the whole of Africa becomes a breeding ground for terrorism, which is not fair. How can you say that in a region which has such a long civilization, both Abrahamic, Christian, Muslim, and Judaic, But unfortunately that you just branded, our region has been branded by this, which makes me very sad. Then the question of conflict is a challenge for us in our countries. That drives famine, of course. And our governments I have to say, sadly, they heavily invest on armaments, I don't want to say this very loudly, I might be in trouble, but that's the truth. Then you got what we call a new phenomenon of, because you got these political conflicts in our countries, they're driven also many people off. I got this from the Vietnamese, boat people at the time in the war in Vietnam. So we have thousands of people from the region, from many of our countries. I'm very sad to say, driven, mostly due to governance issues. I don't think many people are leaving the country because of economics. They are really leaving it because of the political tensions. The brain drain, and who am I to say that? What am I doing at UCL? That's a very good example. I am a brain drain, of course, but I hope I'm a useful one, because I'm promoting my region at least. So brain drain in the Middle, especially in the Middle East or within Africa, the Home Secretary might say here, oh my God, these migrants coming, for goodness sake. I think she should have a lesson from me about the situation on the ground. Sorry, I should be arrested for this. Then the other point is this unplanned urbanization due to, in the pastoral context as well as, there's a lot of urbanization in our countries, and the pastoralist communities are involved. And I'm going to show you the positive and negative side of urbanization, because by integrating themselves in the urban economy, they have animals to sell. So they make a lot of money out of it. And I'm going to be putting a strong case on that. So this is the region, if you like. Now, the ecological setting is important, The highlands, the green ones, and the different colors, the deserts and semi-desert, semi-arid, etc., etc. This is how the region looks. It's quite a diverse, in terms of ecology, not only in terms of ethnicity and cultures, but also in terms of ecology, because these highlands particularly have been the center of many civilizations. This is where we have the three Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, In the monasteries over there, and particularly in Ethiopia, you can see the continuity, and it's a bit of an Eritrea. So, but for me, the interesting bit is the sort of ecological context for this region, which then informs or dictates the livelihood of the people. Now, this is a bit of the political part. We have many countries, including Southern Sudan. No, actually, I should have put Southern Sudan here. That could have me in trouble, Southern Sudan is decided to make it an old map. So this is a regional, and we have a region called the IGAD, Intergovernmental Authority on Development. This is one of the 4 African regional blocks. I would say probably our regional bloc is quite weak because it reflects on the membership of the countries who are boxing one another. I mean, if you look at the SADC, South Africa Development Corporation, it's quite a big one, ECOWAS in West Africa, and then Maghreb in North Africa, and they are relatively in a much stronger position. So this is the politics. This is also the ethnic diversity of the people of the Horn, And I'm talking about the whole region. You can see the the Semitic, Cushitic, Hamitic peoples, you know. And I picked up this as hopefully as a representative of the various ethnic groups, you know, within the region. That gives you a sense, you know, from the warriors to the monks to herders, you know, to whatever, you know. Even this woman putting a little cross, this is also identity, you know. We are Christians, so it's kind of part of the culture, you know. And we have all the sort of Middle Eastern perhaps not far from the Arab world as well, some influence on that, you know. So this is what I want to show. And then let me move forward. Let me also start on my notes, otherwise we might be the whole night, you know, so I want to move forward a bit. John is kind to me so far, he hasn't said anything, so so this is the diversity, if you like, and I think this is the greatest civilization we have. For instance, the Aksumite kingdom, you know, this is thousands of years, and then the Lalibela rock churches in one of the wonders of the world in Highland Ethiopia, and Gondar, one of them, you know, the British talk about their kingdoms and castles. This is an African castle, so it's quite interesting. This is also Lucy, you know, this one of the, Kanwa said something about Lucy. Actually, I saw this Ababa University in the museum. I think, does anyone know the history of Lucy in Ethiopia? Who knows about it? I don't know much about it. I mean, this is actually one of the historical. So we move forward. Now, what I would like to do is to help you, having given you, I hope it makes sense, the regional perspective, which is very important, because for me, those communities we're talking about are part of that region, part of that ecological, political, and social fabric of society. This is what sorry, I'm preaching my own Bible here. Understanding these systems is so important in our country because, firstly, traditional pastoralism in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, etc., is forming into a semi-sedentary style. This one that I think the English tribe long time ago loved these marauding nomads, you know, and the savages and all that. It's no longer the case. I mean, I don't even believe it in the first place. But I think the fact that this is a community which is evolving. And I think this idea of nomadic being savage is actually, in our countries even, the perception is the same, you know. These people are looked down for some reason. I don't understand why, but I mean, people will consider them as happily wandering nomads, you know. All of us are nomads, by the way. Whatever, you know, we go for where the grass is pasture green, so they do the same. Now, the other thing is pastoralism as a technology, if you like, it lacks uniformity, you know, and specialization. There's nothing called pure pastoralist. I would like to stress that. Mostly, it cuts across cultural, ecological boundaries, and communities interact within countries. This is a very clear opportunity, and that's what even inspired me to set up a regional organization because of this very point, you know. So a lot of shared economy, shared cultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. And yet we have borders, you know, we fight over borders sometimes, which is ridiculous. Highland-lowland interactions is very common because the rural communities in the highland areas work very closely with the nomadic communities. Interaction. And livestock is a major, you'll be surprised how well they interact, you know, as communities. So this is a very important part of linking the communities. It's based also on multi-species herding. What I mean is you don't have just cows or goats, you know. In most cases, the economy is mixed, you know, mixed farming. You put your eggs in many baskets, as it were, okay? Now, I am a great believer that there is a huge knowledge system among these communities. What do I mean by that? I think when we are Western trained most of the time, we tend to ignore that kind of knowledge. My belief is there's definitely, for those of you who are young scientists, I would really, from wherever you come, I would like to encourage to dig into this indigenous knowledge, you know, of various systems, for agriculture, health, whatever it is, you know. And significant contribution to the economy. This is what we don't recognize, what these people sell. And the Arabs, in fact, the neighbors get our livestock so cheaply, you know. You cry if I tell you the details. They're just animals. A camel in Sudan, in a local market, you sell it for a couple of $100. You take it to Saudi Arabia or Gulf countries, you're talking about $3,000, you know. And when I work with the nomads in our part, some of them told me, why can't you become, I speak Arabic, so why don't you just become a middleman for us to help us to negotiate with the Arabs, you know? Because look at the terrible, you know, lack of value addition. So this is important. Now, the significant contribution is important. Now, this is just also another, sorry, I have to put images for you to wake you up a bit. Huh? Now, the aspiration, these are the affairs in Ethiopia, and those are the kids I used to, when we did our social protection work, and I talked to them, luckily, and this guy says to me, no, it's our way of life, we're proud, they even have an AK machine gun to protect their animals. This is quite normal, you know. When I talk to those guys who were walking to school 5 kilometers every day, like I did as a kid, barefooted like I was, and I asked, as we were talking to them, an Ethiopian airline was flying over us, you know, for some reason, for some just magical reason, I don't know why. And I was asking them, what do you want to become? One said, I have to become a doctor. 3 of them said, we want to become pilots, you know. What does that tell you? And these are guys in the middle of nowhere, you know, that aspiration. And I think for the young researchers, I also want to appeal to you to actually investigate the transition within societies. This is very important, you know, instead of just moaning and groaning. These people are not, they have aspirations, you know, and a lot of them, those kids, they want to become nomadic. They want to move on. And what's wrong with that? Our understanding is a problem of the way of life, you know, why these communities are evolving. So this is another guy, Sudanese guy, who says very interesting things about the policy perspective. I don't know if he's a very known Sudanese. And he says, for example, political environment is not suitable to these communities. It disrupted their way of life. Secondly, the capabilities of the government structures we have, they neglect this whole industry. They don't really take it very serious as crops. You know, we are very happy to bring rice from some other countries or whatever. But actually, when it comes to the livestock, you know, the governments don't really take this very seriously in our countries. Anything from value addition, from health policy, etc. The disincentive also that they are not encouraged to set up their own organizations as community groups because you are neglected. You know, you're seen as a kind of savage. You know, unfortunately. The absence of active livestock policies at the state level, I'm very sorry, in most of our countries, I work with them, in all of them, you know, it's just heartbreaking. Perhaps Kenya is a bit better in some way, but the majority of those countries, actually, there is no policy which acknowledges the value of this livestock, which promotes additional value into products and also services for this kind of people, you know. There's no policy at the national level. The government might show some statistics, but basically what does that mean, you know? We need to show up a commitment. This is also important that within the PRSP, you know, the strategy of a country, livestock does not feature seriously in terms of investment. Look at the universities we have, you know, how much money we're putting into this system is limited. Now, understanding of the communities themselves, because if you think they're happily wandering nomads, then you're not interested in other than probably settling them in some places, which we're going to discuss about later. The data is not available, unfortunately, you know, because most of the nomads, by the way, don't even want to talk about their livestock, what they produce, you know, because why would they? The government is taxing them. They would play it down, and they would rather do it across borders, which some governments say is illegal, but for them it's not. Your cousins are next door, you know, so you trade with them. Never mind about the political boundaries, and that's very smart. Participatory approaches are also very difficult. The government don't really promote a more livestock-oriented approach to development. It's much more crop-oriented, you know, in many countries. Now, this is a bit of the understanding. Now, my favorite talk is, what I want to do is just to show you, to wake up a little bit, to show you some examples of the livestock breeds in the Horn, and by zone, by country. Very briefly, These are what we call barca cattle in Ethiopia and Eritrea mostly, and they're the most productive animals. And I actually wrote a book about them, and I called it cattle sovereignty among. What did I call it? Cattle. Knowledge sovereignty among African cattle herders, because I actually measured the milk yields for these animals, and I compare favorably with the Frisian. I used to work here as a student, so I was a bit kind of interested. So these animals among the best in the region. Of course, there are others. Now look at this. Also, the purpose of why we produce these animals varies. This is Uganda, the famous Ankole cattle. Can you see this? Massive horns, Could we do this? Could we produce animals like that? This is selective breeding, This is actually a science of some sort. I mean, look at the consistency of the horn. I was getting scared when I went there because I'm not used to animals with long horns. But for them, this is part of the tradition. Animals. Professor Jones' cows must have long horns, And the pot color, look, it's a science. Hate it or love it. Actually, this is a science, How can you breed these animals? And then opposite to that, the Sudanese animals we call Arabi. These are desert animals, short horn, productive. This is another. I just want to show you the comparative opportunities in many ways. And then we go here. This is another Sudan, in the northern part of the Sudan, the desert, the Butana cattle, and then, of course, the camels of the Sahara. This is the northern part. So this is also another, this was the sort of race camels I was talking about, where the Arabs are happily buying from us, $200, and then you go to Dubai. I actually been to the place where they have these race camels in Dubai, This is $3,500. So give you an idea about the genetic resources in our countries. This is all I'm trying to say. I could have gone on for hours and hours about it. I just want to give you a bit of a feel to it, Very important, as I said, the livestock trade, and this is the Berbera port I just found a gentleman from Berbera, from Somaliland. Berbera port is one of the busiest ports. Look at the livestock, for goodness sake. Hundreds of thousands. These are being exported to Saudi Arabia, and camels are mostly to the Emirates, where they have race camels. But these are mostly Saudi Arabia. The tragedy for the producers is these animals don't bring much value to the owners, For instance, you just ship them out. Now with the New Zealand lamb coming from the other side, maybe this kind of animals will not be, they will be used for slaughter rather than, So there's a bit of there's goats and mostly goats and sheep, and this also fluctuates, Fluctuates sometimes. There could be some crisis in the region, and so that kind of trade. But this is probably a bit more optimistic. One of the optimistic pictures I want to put in. So for sure, it's true. Now look at this sad camel. The camels are also transported by sheep to the Middle East. And this guy is literally crying and say, why are you taking me anyway? And they really look at that. They're rough, tough, but they are. I mean, that's how it is. That's the reality. And these are big ships taking the animals to. My point being the economic loss for the animal producers, for the livestock producers, is a disaster, to be honest, So I better hurry up. Pastoralist communities, what are the crises they are facing? To sum it up, if you like, I'll be very quick because John is looking at me,
No. Right.
I consider him still as my teacher, so I've been careful. The conflicts, and that's why I'm personally committed to peace building in our region. That's really the commodity we're missing, High and low intensity conflicts negatively impact on livelihood, both pastoralists, farmers, and everyone else. Because we are a conflict zone, and that's why I was telling you to put things in the context, not to pick up this on this particular community, but actually put them in a wider context within the Horn. So that is a major issue, challenge for us. Our politicians like boxing one another. Don't ask me why. We have a problem. We have a leadership problem in our country. I have no political ambitions, so I can say that myself. There's a lot of issues in our countries, Look at the Sudan at the moment. Look at the Ethiopia, Ethiopia. What's going on, I mean, so that creates more poverty and more, and for the other groups as well. Don't get me wrong, it could be for the urban communities as well as the rural communities. Land grabbing is a big curse, since the 2007 crisis. And many of these pastors, unlike the belief, the argument between social scientists and natural scientists, that the social scientists say, well, pastoralism is a good way of life, we have to sustain it. But then the natural science guys say, no, it's the most devastating for the environment. Those debates, the truth is in the middle somewhere. I don't think one is one or the other, and we have to be careful. We have to have an open mind. Now, land grabbing, if these areas were so desolate in our countries, for example, in the case of the Horn, in other parts of Africa, why would our lands be grabbed? The riverine areas, the high potential areas, being grabbed. So it is a contradiction. Land grabbing, has been there historically, but especially during the financial crisis, the good financial crisis, 2007. You remember that time. And I'm going to show you some images in a minute. Climate change is, of course, but these people have been coping with it for centuries. It's the conflict which undermines this livelihood further. And then we have the revival. Our universities, many of our countries where I go, and we just look around, I'm afraid the Green Revolution Bible is still alive and well, What are we going to do about it? But it is, by that I mean, rather than looking at your own resources internally, whether it's livestock or crops, why not develop them? And then the tendency is, I'm Western trained, I know it all, you go there and teach the same. But I think that's quite disturbing, to be honest. We need to question that approach, fundamentally, philosophically as well. Now, invasive species, I don't know how much you know about this. This is, as you have the land grabbing to remove the indigenous vegetations, then you have other species coming to take their place. And one of them is what we call Prosopis juliflora. It has a South American origin. Is there anyone from South America here? Peru? Peru? I went to Peru, and I actually was keen to see the origins of that plant. A clever guy, or a stupid guy like me, went to green the deserts in Africa, So he had, juliflora is good in South America, so why not? It's a dry land, so it's an arid plant. So some of them brought that into our region about 30, 40 years ago. The idea was this would green our desert now. What they didn't know, it's also a poisonous plant. I did the research on it. I think it's very toxic, But now it's invading the potential in the riverine areas where the pastoralists. So this is now a major problem for the pastoralist community, and we have to do something about it. I'm just alerting people to that. This is about the land grabbing. You see that from the 2007 to 2009 financial fuel crisis, and you can see how Africa in general, the red ones are the I call them grabbers, and the blue is a grabbed, Is it? What can I say? That's probably. So you can see how the northern powers have been very active in grabbing look at this is the Amazon, of course, and then look at the Central Africa, and then Asia on the other side. This shows you how rapidly that. Some of you I can give you some more information on how this escalated the degree of desertification and undermining the land for everybody, including the pastoralists. Now, pastoralist communities are also facing internal problems. For instance, the land grabbing not only by international cooperation, but also by elites, ruling elites, You're favored, then you might go during the emperor's time in Ethiopia, if you are a good citizen, the emperor would give you land in some part of the country, say, you're a good citizen, so you are a sir so-and-so or lord so-and-so. So in most cases, those kind of areas were actually pastoralist areas, They were given away because the peasants will fight for the land, they will not let their farm. But in the nomadic areas, it was easy for the emperor even to allocate land. And this is very common. To date, even, the elite are still owning land in many of these pastoral areas. Government infrastructure in nomadic area is almost nil. Why? It is because of the attitude, towards these people as a community. So therefore, you don't really develop, for example, nomadic schools. Nomadic schools means in many of our countries, you settle these guys, settle them down and give them, education in one place. How are they going to survive, Was absolutely nothing wrong with mobile education in some primary school. If you look at the Quranic school, for instance, these communities have their religious leaders traveling with them all over the place. And I think that sort of idea, the school can be mobile with the nomadic community, is feasible. And places like Mongolia and other places have shown that it's feasible to do that. Government infrastructure, lack of securing livelihoods, recognizing their rights, Many of our governments have problems accepting this reality and really supporting them because of the deeply rooted prejudice of the way of life, if you like. Displacement also is now, as I said before, a major challenge for all the communities, whether they are urban, pastoralist, or rural. I mean, for me, it doesn't really make a difference. It is affecting, and that's very sad. Now, this is interesting. How am I? I'm okay for time, Joe.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, happy about that. Good. Now, having told you the negative, the challenges, the region with lots of civilization to be proud of, now we're going to come to what about the future of these people. This is very important. We have to be, I was encouraged by the organizers not to be negative, not to be positive, but keep up others. I'm trying to do that today. I could have been more negative about things, but I just want to keep the positive and the negative. This is what is happening. As the kids I told you earlier, that some of them want to be pilots and some of them want to remain as herders. I'm building around that. Number one, on the livelihood, what I call adaptive strategy. People adapt. Myself, I was an African boy, walk for 5 kilometers every day for school. Barefooted sometimes, family of 6 or 7. I identify with these guys, and my life has changed, John mentioned to be becoming there was a war in my country. I came here, barefooted, if you like, not barefoot, not really. Don't tell that to the Home Secretary. So, we transformed it. I transformed it, I came to England. I had no A-levels because we're not a British colony. I was telling John knows this. So how do I go to college? And by the way, when you are a refugee, also, you are very clever in many ways, actually. Shall I say that to myself? I didn't have any A-levels when I came to England, not even O-levels. So I go to university. That's what the dream, just get on with it. And then I found an Englishman who knew us in Eritrea a long time ago. And I asked him, what do? I don't have A-levels. I don't have GCSEs, And I gave him a nice advice. God bless him. He said, you have to go to a farm and work for 2-3 years, as an internee in a farm, And I took that very seriously. And I ended up working in the British country. I would never have done that if I wasn't, if I had an A-level in Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya. I'm sorry, African guys, to mention. You come from a British system, you have an advantage over us, or in South Africa for that matter. So I then spent 2.5 years in all these shires, Gloucestershire, Worcestershire, this place. What am I doing, an African guy in early 20s? Because I had a purpose, That was the only way for me to get to college. And having worked for 2.5 years, I got used to the farming system, which is totally irrelevant to me, but it was a key to get somewhere, what do I do being a truck driver and truck driving and all that? I learned all the jobs, combined harvesting, for goodness sake. But that was an entry point. You understand me? Because in those days, internship, unlike the current situation in UK, internship was valued, there are opportunities for people from working class, whatever race they are. They were having opportunities, they don't have to have an A-level. In my case, it was a great opportunity. So I say I have actually evolved in this way, So having gone to Persia College and whatever those places, not to bore you, and I went to end up in a Royal Agricultural College, now it's a university. Sons, big farmers' sons, who am I, a peasant, the students, sorry, you say that the students who are there come from families with, 500 hectares of land. So I went there, and I think the great thing is, like, these nomadic communities are transforming the same way. That's why I'm mentioning my own personal example humbly, because I'm being honest to myself, So the thing is, once we go through that societal change, when the very kids, the sons of daughters, will bring out change in society. That's what I believe in. Now, the other thing is diversification of economy, getting involved into local government structures, members of parliament, for example, of the pastoral areas in both Kenya. We did a study on the role of pastorals and parliamentarians in the whole of Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, I think, and Uganda. So they are playing a role in the government, sometimes in the liberation movements even. Ensuring adequate social services is what's happening now slowly. The semi-sedentary system families are now splitting into a nomadic within the same family and a sedentary. Communication, you'll be amazed, the mobile communication. You can phone from 1,000 kilometers somewhere and ask what's the price of livestock in Khartoum or Addis, This is a huge change. We don't notice it. I think some of you guys should look at communication, the role in communication in development. This is very important, whether it's nomadism, whether it's farming, whatever. So this is key. And they are connected, Gender roles are also changing. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Now, sedentarization permits income diversification. Some of the people become teachers in a village, others in the nomadic herds, Local government, as I said, in Ethiopia, for example, there's a good positive development there. Adequate social services, communication, and the recognition of indigenous knowledge is also coming slowly. There's actually now serious research done on that. Now, let me show you an example in Sudan, in Kassala town, actually an example which can be replicated elsewhere in the Horn. I tell you what this is. For example, Kassala city here is around 100,000, 150,000 people. Then what the pastors do is, this is amazing. Part of the family in a place called Sursur, which is 5 kilometers outside the city of Kassala. Now, the children, the wife, the kids are here from the same family, They are permanently settled because then they take advantage of education and, trading small livestock products. And then the men, they have to travel for 100 kilometers away from the families, 200 kilometers because of the grazing area, especially in the dry season. Up to 200 for Sudanese would go to Ethiopian border 150 kilometers quite easily. So what is happening here is, you see, when the season is through the seasonal migration, for part of the year, they will come closer to the cities if there is rain here in that region, And what they do is they will sell milk straight up here, and then when they go back to their settlement, animal feeds, dairy consuming materials, coffee, sugar, etc. So what does that show you? There's clear interaction, between these systems, and this is, I think, potentially. This would be a fascinating piece of research to work on in some of these situations, because you can read the transformation in real terms. Let me move on. Now, women's role is also changing. As I said to you, mostly small stock around the towns, processing livestock products, and this is actually the nomadic tent, It just about 5-10 kilometers away from the main town. So they're really playing dominant role. And this is in Hargeisa town, where you can see the interaction, women trading small livestock. And this is also quite liberating for women because they have got their own income, which they control. Because I should have said that our region is very male-dominated, still is, very much. So I think these sorts of opportunities are also there to... same thing, and this is my market in Hargeisa city in Somaliland. You can see the interactions, commodities, which the pastors need. So they have to sell their livestock in order to get this. And it's also controlled by themselves. This is what I was talking about earlier. The connection with the urban is very, very important. Now, I'm almost done, thank God. livelihood systems. Another issue for the environment, I think men, we are a bit daft, we just like a lot of the donkey work. So men are involved in charcoal making, destroying the forests, unfortunately, and they take all the money for themselves. And then the other one is salt. In most cases, you can see men from the pastoralist origins moving more towards this kind of trades, because they are very easy to. So charcoal and salt trade is one of the alternatives, if you like. I'm almost done now. So the conclusion. Number one, very important, this is not only among pastoral people. There is this misconception, the historical injustices in these areas. Perhaps the savages needs to be tamed, to be taxed, needs to be civilized. These are the stigmas, And this is, this has to change, and it is changing rapidly. And I'm making actually a very important admission in the reality of the ground. Cross-border communities have close affinities, so national borders become irrelevant in most cases. Our governments are busy protecting those borders, mind you, but in our logo, the Penha logo I'm showing you, we don't have even we have just one horn region, to indicate the cross-border trade across those borders. Now, this is what government policy is missing. In most of these countries, the pastoralist communities could be easily two citizens of two countries. Easily, it's not difficult. But government don't like that, You are either mine or the other country, so kind of interesting. But this question of cross nationality and triple citizenship, I have two citizenship myself. Don't you? I think John is really British passport. I have British passport and an Eritrean passport, A lot of other people have the same. So dual nationalities gives you also responsibility, to be a responsible citizen. So this is important in the case of pastoral people. Threats, land grabbing, as I said, mineral grabbing, salt grabbing, both from the elites, also international. I'm very sorry now with the Ukraine war. The need for this is going to be even escalating. Some of these conflicts you can see now, and that includes our region. Livelihood will continue to depend on livestock are going to be there. Whether you're a small farmer, whether you're a pastoralist, the livestock is the reality. It's your machine, it's your economy. Basically. So this is what we need to be conscious of it. Spontaneous urbanization, voluntary. Not necessarily driven by a war, but as I said, this is another issue which needs to be studied properly. Then the government dilemma, there's a kind of obsession that these nomadic people should stop in one place. Policies have been so far inducement, encourage them to settle down. The book we wrote was, in the case of Ethiopia, the government was really encouraging these people to settle down in order for them to get social protection support, So this is common, and it's also mostly top down, The government tend to tell you in the pastoral areas, kind of, this is our policy, you either do it or not, And conflict prevention, I think to me, this is the worst curse we have in a region. I think we have to resolve the conflicts through peaceful means. Otherwise, I'm afraid the whole region might fall apart the way things are going. And I just hope that our work contributes to understanding. People say, but this is it, showing off myself, solidarity between Welsh farmers, pastoralists, Scotland, Ireland. I've been to many of these parts of the country. That's a solidarity, by the way. The livelihood, there are similarities. You go to Wales, you'll be surprised how similar they are with this kind of lives. I was amazed. I went to, this is me working with the people in Ethiopia, and the other one is Peru, the Amazon, This woman, I was wearing a shirt, and this high up in the Amazon, and she was pitying me, She even gave me the to cover myself. She gave me, this is the llamas in the highlands of Peru, up in the mountains. Lovely, but I just, look at the environment, look at the ecology, for goodness sake. So I believe greatly there should be a solidarity between all these peoples who produce livestock in the world. On that note, Thank you very much.
Now, questions, comments, and including people who are joining us on Zoom. I don't know how I see the Zoom questions. I don't know whether Baz can help me if there are any. But who would like to start? Yes, sir. Could you just give your name and where you're from when you ask a question? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Gilbert Mickey, originally from Cameroon.
Mickey from Cameroon.
Yes. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. It's a piece of work that is quite connecting, especially with those of us from Africa. So we seem to be connecting in terms of the realities. What caught my attention very much is about the changing gender roles. And you talk about transformation. Specifically, I do understand that with the pastoral communities, specifically we're talking about the females. For you to get access to the females is quite challenging. You need to pass through the husbands. They don't even go to the market. From your research, when you talk about changing gender roles, what specifically is appealing to the women from the pastoral communities?
I think it's a very good question, and thanks for the... I went to Sierra Leone one time because thanks to this work I do in UCL, I travel and see. I mean, the gender, I think the problem is at a philosophical level. You have to start it there, If we agree that our societies are male-dominated, call it culturally, socially, whatever. I mean, certainly in the Abrahamic traditions we come from, this is obvious, Why would my three sisters did not the same education I got myself as a boy, And that's really, you go back to a very fundamental, and I think in Africa in general, there is an issue. When I went to Sierra Leone, I'm not dodging your question. I was asking the fisher women and men, who does the fisheries? The men walk in the morning and bring the fish, The selling, the processing is done by women. But then you see where the money goes, it goes back to the men. So this is what we have to be a bit careful. And I was not, I was saying some of these changes have become by default. When the nomadic society is not in a position to migrate like before, you find a meaningful way of women being involved in processing the ghee, the butter, the leather, near the markets, and they make money. And the other thing is, somehow by default, and this is, I should have said it, the nomadic boys are still tend to travel more with their fathers, after the camels. And so by default, and I did some study in Eastern Sudan, more and more women are actually going to school because they are settled in the peripheries of the town. This is quite fascinating. And I think I would like to be honest and say, let's dig into more of this in a particular African context. Perhaps in some case, our region is very much traditional in that sense, to be fair to the other parts of Africa. But still, the domination, being male dominant, I mean, look at this country, Sorry, John. I mean, suffragettes, remember? 100 years ago, all this fuss they're telling about, this country is male dominated, it still is male dominated, isn't it? Up here, I mean. Look at the big companies, executive, who are they? Look at the big judges. So let's be a bit more like inward looking as well. And this is cultural things that are not going to change overnight.
Yeah.
That's my answer to you. I hope you're not dissatisfied.
Right, the gentleman in yellow and then Richard.
Okay, my name is Amos.
Amos?
I'm from Kenya.
Kenya.
My neighbor.
First question is, why do you think IGAD is not effective till now? And the follow-up question is, do you think IGAD and the East African community can be integrated? Because some of the IGAD nations are in ESC.
Yeah.
Do you think they can be integrated?
That's a good question, by the way. IGAD stands for Intergovernmental Authority for Development. It's a regional bloc, In the continent, we have these four major regional, also the East Africa community, which is functional in many ways. So, intergovernmental authority in our region. the truth is, and I'm being truthful, I could have pretended to showing you some nice buildings. But actually, I want to be honest with you, that body within the African continent is the weakest link in our countries because it reflects the political turbulence, If the leaders are not talking, they're fighting, how can it be a viable organization? Yeah. That's the truth as far as I'm concerned, And I have no shame in saying that. So I think what you said is, we consider Kenya and Uganda as part of the Horn, guys, because we love you, we are neighbors. But the Horn of Africa, in fact, is that horny bit, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, that bit, that sort of horn, the horny bit, the Horn of Africa. So, but I'm a great supporter of Kenya and Uganda joining us, although Kenya and Uganda are really very much into this common market of Eastern Africa, Tanzania included, the sort of, and they still have that sentiment, by the way, they still connect with those countries. There's nothing wrong with it, but I don't think the IGAD has to reshape, and in order to reshape it, we need peace and conflict resolution in our region. Without that, you cannot create any regional organization. Simple as that. And this is what I was saying the whole night. That thing.
All right.
Are you okay now?
Richard, next.
No, he hasn't finished.
He wants to come back. Sorry, he wants to come back.
Sure. Go ahead.
Come back.
Kenya, go ahead.
Amos, go on. You want to say more?
Somebody in front of him.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm coming to you after Richard. Is that all right? Richard, yes.
Sorry. So Richard.
Thanks, Prof, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I think what we're experiencing around the developed world is the demonization of livestock.
Yeah.
And in particular, the argument that they cause desertification and they are major contributors to climate change. Yet your pastoralists in the Horn have been looking after animals for thousands of years, and it's been sustainable. What, in your view, is making it less sustainable for pastoralists to maintain that main area of pastoralism?
Well, I think three things, thanks, this is a very good question. Three things in the sense that the whole conflict stability management, it affects everyone, including the pastoralists, absolutely. The second thing is, I think the tendency that our institutions, our universities, and I used to go to many parts of universities in Ethiopia and other countries as well, so it's the way the higher education is tailored, Pastoralism is seen as a kind of menial something, a bit of savages and wandering with animals, that's kind of attitude. And I always get shocked when I go to our university in our region. Why can't you do some research about these people instead of judging them, And thirdly, the biggest advantage for them is they have livestock. And as I said, there's a very good interaction between highland farmers and lowland pastoralists. For instance, if you take Ethiopia or Eritrea or where there's highlands and lowlands, there's a very good relationship because the peasant farmers would need oxen for plowing, They can go and buy from male calves from the nomadic areas because in most cases the male calves are, they are exterminated, They don't need them. They need the female, the cows. So, that relationship is there. And I think the other thing is, this is not properly understood. These communities trading with one another is the problem of the government, not them. You talk to them, and even in these conflict zones now, these communities are talking to one another. They said to the government, what are you doing to us? Can you leave us alone to live our lives, I think it comes to our political systems. I'm sorry to insist on this. And the fact that, the civil society, by any standard, in Africa or elsewhere, our region is weak on civil society. You are. I'm not talking about Kenya and Uganda. Excuse me, but you fire me. Uganda.
It's got an AK-47.
No, it's okay. Uganda, Kenya, the other countries, there's a problem there. Seriously, civil society. You're either part of the party, the ruling party, or you are in exile. Shouting without. There's no lobbying from within to bring about change, and that's true for pastoralists. That's true for urban communities. I'm afraid that's really the nature of the system.
We're going to Indonesia now.
Indonesia.
Good evening, Professor.
Good evening.
Your
My
name?
name is Fanny, and I can.
Fanny, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for this insightful talk and how you dedicate yourself to the community. I think it's very inspiring. I have been also working at the community, and I think it is very challenging. And I think I can maybe take the framework to be applied in my home country. So my question is, when you come to the community and see all the limitations that they might have, what, based on your experience, like what is the first thing that we should do or we should intervene with? For example, is it the social aspect, like by engaging to the community, or we should approach the political aspect, for example, like by cooperating to the local government? Maybe you can suggest.
Okay, for those online who may not have heard the full question, Fanny is saying her work is with communities in, I think, Java in Indonesia. And she's asking Professor Fre, what's his advice in going to a community? Do you start with the social aspects, the political aspects, the economic? How do you approach a community when you first engage?
I think the most important for me is the humility yourself. You don't come with the mentality that I'm better than you. I mean, the humility with oneself is key.
Yeah.
For instance, when you have a village meeting, they sit on the floor with the community and just have a discussion. They give you a mat, they give you camel milk, you drink it. And this is really the human. Sometimes we forget that, we are just worried about writing the responses and quickly, I think our own attitude, we should question ourselves. That's my first advice, the humility about oneself, your own limitation. And secondly, also to put yourself in their place, And most of these communities are quite clever. They understand their problems. But they also got prejudice like us, like everyone else, You need to appreciate why are they not sending their kids to school, for instance. That could be legitimate reasons, Those kids may be earning a living somewhere for the same family, I think we have to be, your situation in your country, you are lucky in so many ways, perhaps, you have an opportunity to, this is a challenging situation, to be honest.
Yes, now hang on, I've got two questions. I'm going to say ladies first and then you afterwards. Sorry.
Thank you for an interesting talk. My name is Catherine, and my question is to do with climate change. I'm just kind of picturing all of the dead livestock in Turkana in North Kenya, and I'm thinking, what is the future for these pastoralists, and are these incidents increasing, and what kind of is the hope for these situations?
That's a good question. I used to work in Turkana even during the famine with some agencies, but we need to kind of do two sides to that story, three sides. One, NGOs would love to show those, it's also part of the mobilization for of course, this is normal, it's a human reaction. But I think more important, fundamentally, if you think how well the Turkana community is represented within the Kenyan system, governance, infrastructure, etc., like the things I was raising earlier, I think there is this fundamental, any sensible government would predict a drought, and you can have a destocking program, for instance. You don't let these animals die, but I think the fact that these animals are just shown to die, there is a lot more behind it, underlying that. I would say that, and I think it doesn't happen. It happens in Turkana, yes, but I think in other places, it is a conflict, or also in Turkana, there is a conflict, internal tribal, and they are neglected. The Turkanas are neglected as a community, yes or no? The Kenyans can correct me. Relatively, yes. Oh, that's a good one. Relatively. Are they neglected or not?
Theoretically, the political system in Kenya has devolved to local districts, and theoretically, Turkana is a co-equal district with the rest. But actually, some of the attitudes you're talking about towards pastoralists, that they're primitive and all the rest of it. So it's not straightforward. Satisfied with the answer? Sir, your name, and you're from Zambia? No, you're not from Zambia.
Hi, my name is Ivan.
Ivan?
I'm from Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone. Yes.
Okay. In terms of the roles and responsibilities and the pastoral system, don't you think culture and the land system has influenced it?
Can you repeat that a bit louder?
In terms of the role and responsibility of the women and men in the pastoral system, don't you think it's the landowner system and culture that influences? The land
tenure system, not the gender difference, is the key issue.
Two together.
The roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, but you're suggesting land tenure is the primary thing. Is that right?
I'm just asking.
Okay.
It has influenced the roles and responsibilities of men.
Yeah.
I don't really get that, to be honest. You make it a bit easy for me.
Well, let's take Kenya for a second. I don't know if this helps. In Kenya, it's said that 70% of the land is controlled by men, 5% by women, and the rest by outsiders, roughly. And also the World Bank did a study in Kenya, by the way, that said if women are in charge of a farm, the productivity is on average 25% higher, which is a challenge to us chaps. So your point is really about land tenure and women's lack of engagement with it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, are you from Sierra Leone, you said?
Yes.
I'm going to come back to you. Because I noticed as well the whole male domination as a culture, is very similar. I was surprised, to see that, but it manifests itself in different ways. As I said to you, I saw the men going catching at 5 o'clock in the morning, get the fish into town, and then the women do all the selling, the sorting out, and then in the evening, the man comes and says, "Where's the money?" What does that tell you? It says this is a cultural thing. It's actually a patriarchal society where the man dominates one way or the other. Isn't it? I mean, that's how I took it. Having come from a very conservative part of the region, when I saw that in Sierra Leone, when you talk to the women in groups, they tell you this is what they do to us. They pick up the fish, we process it, we sell it during the day or the evening, and then the man comes asking for the money. Where is the money? Would you agree with me, or am I just making up? So this is the issue. Thank you. So the Leoneans are very gentle. They don't.
Yeah,
they're very kind to me.
That's why our foreign secretary is from Sierra Leone.
Our foreign secretary
of the UK.
I didn't know that.
James Cleverly. Yeah.
He's from Sierra Leone.
Yeah. But that's one of his spies in the background.
So I think the male dominant. What I'm trying to say is, look, this is a cultural, fundamental cultural issue deep down. No matter how we turn it around, But then, also the camels. Men are more after camels in this whole region. Camels, cattle, where women are into small livestock. This is. I don't call it the given, but that's how it is, and we have to change
cultural
it.
tradition.
It's a tradition,
Is there anyone here from Malawi? Just on this last, I'm just talking about fishing ladies who the money is taken from them. Since Malswitch cards were introduced, women in Malawi are able to pay for their seeds from the card, no money, no cash involved, and they're able to charge the card with their proceeds. So instead of the money being drunk and wasted by some of their husbands, it's there for the school fees. And that system seems to be working in other countries. Beza in Kenya and so on.
Yeah. I did allude to that a little bit by saying when the certain tradition becomes a blessing because the women then have control of certain livestock, over milk products, even poultry. And then the boys have a disadvantage because they travel with the livestock because able-bodied, the age of 15, whatever. And the girls are, I was quite surprised when we did a study, the girls by default, not even by design, because this is still a male dominant, but the women are in the same settlement around the city, Kasala. Now the education was high among the girls, but I call it that by default. It was totally by design, and sometimes things happen by default.
Jim had a question, and then there's a lady up here, and I don't know who was first. I think the lady, Jim. I'm going to go ladies first.
I also have the mic, so I will do deliberately. First of all, thank you so much for, I'm not sure if it's working, for this insightful presentation. I can really see how it came from a very genuine place to research, and especially focusing on the marginalized group is something that, so I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Hannah. I'm from Syria. And I also work with the marginalized groups. The thing is, in the research, one of the most challenging factors that because of these groups, they are marginalized, there aren't enough research, there aren't enough articles that you can stand for or rely to. I think today we heard from you a lot of insights that I'm sure that's not written in words in the article itself or in the journal itself. And we're very lucky and privileged today to be with you and to hear it from you. My question is how we can really reach more research towards marginalized groups in different areas. What is your advice? Thank you.
I think it's a fascinating question, and I'm going to be a bit personal on it, myself. To take you slightly through my own journey, for instance, you are now doing your master's, postgraduate. I think this is a great opportunity to look at specific niches within given countries, your own places. That's a very good strategy for you to think through. And then, of course, information is available, by the way. You can find, but you want to generate information yourself, For instance, if you want to deal with, let's say, conflict, whatever it is, the dynamics of conflict in a given society, this is where we dig into the reality of our own countries, I mean, when I did my PhD here, I was blessed, I should have said this, on top of this gentleman here who did my undergraduate. I had a Professor Chris Garforth, he's not there anymore. And when I did my PhD, I also wanted to work at the same time, in those days, even there were no scholarships. I had to work, at the same time. So first year of theory, you do it like everywhere. And then when we came to the second year, because I was very clear I want to do, I was wanting to study the kind of things I was showing you, the knowledge system around this nomadic community was my very specific. And this guy was very supportive, he said to me, look, I don't know very much about what you're talking about, nomads, knowledge systems, just get on with it. And I had to deal with him, and I'm being honest with you, proud of this university. He says to me, 5 months, you bring me a chapter.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did, I disciplined myself, I produced, because a lot of the work was based on the field with this cattle I was showing about. Almost a love affair with these people, So I came every month, every 5 months with a chapter, And Chris looked at it. He studied me very meticulously, gave me a feedback. Within a couple of months, I got on with it. That's how I finished my PhD. But the thing is, it is possible to motivate yourself. That's what I'm trying to say to you. As young, bright guys, I'm not bright anymore as I used to be. So I think at this age, this is a great opportunity for you, to really explore yourself and focus on particular issues within your own setting. That's really what I'd like to recommend. Thank you.
And particularly, Hannah, the question, how can I go home and make a difference
Very
to
important.
people's lives?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because working for and with and doing research about marginalized groups is very challenging because they are marginalized. They're marginalized groups. They are marginalized to the degree that there aren't any research about them. And I can give examples. For example, in Syria, I was working in a project that supports the former detained women and the wives of current detainees. There isn't research whatsoever about these women. About this group. They're marginalized to the degree that none of the civil society organizations, no government agencies have thought about them. They're very stamped. They don't even have access to the facilities or to the services provided by the organizations because they're stamped with a lot of stuff, So that's why it triggered me to think, how can I do more research?
You can be a source of knowledge yourself, I mean, also compare other experience from elsewhere, comparable situations, There's a way of, you could be a source. That's what I'm trying to say to you, A good thesis, master's thesis, focus on something like that itself is very valuable.
Jim, you've been very patient.
Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Jim Ellis Jones. I'm originally from Tanzania. I'm also a graduate of Reading here, I did MSc. Okay, but my question is about West Africa and the Fulani, who moved across Mali and Niger and across Nigeria.
Yeah.
They also carry AK rifles. There's a lot of conflict across those northern parts. The grazing areas are shrunk, or the corridors of grazing have shrunk. And there's a lot of conflict between the Fulani and the settled farmers. And you've got military governments that are beginning to form in northern parts. I just wonder what your experience is in that part of the world, and how to resolve some of the big conflicts that are in existence today and taking many lives.
Well, I mean, I should have said mineral resources in those pastoral areas are a major problem. They are available, you see. Look at Nigeria, look at all this whole sort of Central African Republic. There are minerals there, by the way. As you know, where there's potash in Ethiopia and Eritrea along the coast now, the Afar region, there is plenty of potash, So unfortunately, those pastoral areas have become also now another source, which means become a conflict source as well, because some other powerful groups will come and I think by going back to the Fulani, traditionally they cross the Sahara towards Sudan, mostly northern Sudan. That's what the belt of mobility. Apparently, the story goes that even their livestock now, there's some Fulani cattle, in Sudan, in the northern part of Sudan. So there's an issue where this long-range nomadism a long time ago, the Fulani is coming to even the Tutsis from in Rwanda. Apparently, there's a migration pattern was from the north going south, that sort of migration. But I am not really confident enough to link the West Africa, other than this kind of small example I gave from Sierra Leone where I've been, I'm not really confident enough to make the link. But the similarities in terms of resource conflicts, for example, political instability, those are common factors, the cross-border issue. Fulanis don't know borders, 3 countries, 3, 4, this is what I'm talking. I remember the multiple citizenship of some of these people, but we're not thinking like that, and that governments are also weak because of the instability internally, all this military government in that region, particularly now, and I think it's ultimately, the conflict resolution and understanding between these neighborhood countries is a critical thing. This is what's missing, Then you have no trade, the border is closed, you are conflicting with one another, you're even exacerbating the poverty within these countries. And the assets are there, the animals are there, the livestock is there. It's the lack of the market is what's killing them.
Right. I think we make this the last question or the penultimate question. Yes, sir. And then there's one.
I've spent a fair chunk of my life in the Horn, starting off in Darfur in the early 70s, where we thought we were addressing the conflict over water between the pastoralists and the farmers, and over land, because there is land there and crops grow. Then working through a whole succession of crises in the Horn, through to 2000, for example, when we led a big mission to the Horn of Africa on food security there. And our conclusion was what we need is a good exit strategy for pastoralists, where I would put in big red letters in your slides the need for investment in infrastructure. Infrastructure for pastoralism, but also infrastructure in terms of education and health that will allow people the opportunity to develop their skills and indeed become pilots or doctors. Very little has been done. One side comment on Kenya, there is an organisation called the Council of Governors, and that has worked really well in channeling central government resources at the district level to address local problems that the pastoralists face. And they have this money they can plot, whether they want to do a road to a market, or they want to do a hafir, a tank for water supply, or they want support in growing vegetables. And this has shown how local governments can work quite effectively. Are these transferable ideas, do you think, to Ethiopia, for example? You had a mention there that things are working well in terms of local governance.
So are you asking me about
Comment on that.
comment on that, specifically on? I didn't see the Ethiopia connection in this, so sorry.
Local governance.
Yeah. Local governance. I meant it in the local governance in two contexts. One is, do these communities have a role in the civil society in general? My answer earlier was maybe with the exception of Kenya and Uganda, the space for civil society in our countries is limited, very limited, And that includes pastoralist representation as well. Secondly, when it comes to elections, we did the study on Kenya on the pastoralist parliamentarians some time ago with NRI and others. We looked at what's going on there. And I think what we found out was the pastoralist communities in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda were fairly represented in the system, in the government. They find people in the government now with the three countries. I've seen it myself. There is some kind of representation, but it doesn't go beyond that. And in the sense of the real civil society, on conflict resolution, on land conflict issues, all those burning issues, are somehow seen too sensitive, and governments tend to avoid them. That's my experience. I mean, to be fair to the Sudanese, from what I've done, my own work for many years, there is slightly better opening in that sense, There's allows, if you look at the current conflict in Sudan now, the trade unions, the medical associations are very actively involved in trying to find a solution in the conflict, I think in the other parts of the world, I wish we could do a bit more of that. That's my honest view. We don't really, I think if you look at the legislation, in many of this, when it comes to civil society, there's a lot of constraints, unfortunately. And that includes not only the pastoralists, but also other groups. That's why I always insisted on the conflict resolution, on justice, on more internally driven initiatives, and openness as well. Because without openness, I don't think you're going to do much in our country.
The last question, your name and where you're from, please.
My name is Christopher Mwembe. I come from Zimbabwe.
Christopher from Zimbabwe, thank you.
Yes. Actually, the presentation was so exciting. I also work for the marginalized people in Zimbabwe. But my question would be maybe to say, from your own opinion, Professor, are there any local initiatives that are being done by the pastoral community to address their own situation? Thank you.
Quickly, the African Union, by the way, there is something called the pastoralist framework of some legal framework, but it's a nicely written up. When I read it, I almost cried with joy, but actually when it comes to the implementation, fundamental being the cross-border trade with these countries, it has to be secure, because that's where the real money is, If you trade with each other, that's really what, and then the borders closed forever, due to conflict. And then the institutions we have also being more biased towards crops rather than livestock. And with all this climate change, with all this talking, some of it is pretty irrelevant. Yeah. That's really also the danger where now that Bible is reverberant. I mean, what we have in this country, the farming is completely different, what the livestock contribution to, greenhouse. This is unfair. And we tend to believe it in our countries and say, oh, yes.
I think Christopher's question is,
yes, what was it?
Are the local pastoralist communities themselves generating initiatives to do something about their plight?
Right.
Is that?
Yeah, a good question. In fact, I was trying to dodge it a little bit, but you're right. In these countries, you have to be a bit careful. So I look. You see, you are right. It's a very good question. It's a very good question, and I'm not dodging it. All I want to say is, can you imagine the circumstances of these people, the context where they are, and how can they even organize themselves in a situation where, number one, the legislation is restrictive. If you want to register as an NGO and you have rights on it, human rights or this rights and that, the first reaction from the legitimate authority to register is ask more questions, you know. If you are talking about building a road or an infrastructure or a school, and I'll give you a good example. For instance, the book we did on social protection in Ethiopia, PSNP, and the lessons for sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to launch it at UCL on the 6th of December. He's going to share it. So we looked with an open mind during the previous regime in Ethiopia, you know. There was quite a bit of investment on social protection. And we are particularly interested on the impact of the social protection at PCMP among the pastoralist communities, the Afar particularly in Ethiopia. And what was amazing was quite revealing, you know. And we were openly presenting the findings of the study. And basically what we found out in that, the whole design of the social protection itself is really tailored towards more sedentary communities, you know, farming communities for that matter. And then it didn't cater specifically on the question of mobility, facilities, for example, much more health clinics, for instance. There isn't really much. The land rights, things like that, were not really taken into account. So it ended up that the social protection, to be fair, has some impact among pastoralist communities, as we found in our study, but there's a lot more to do. When you compare the impact of social protection in highland Ethiopia, for example, you know, some highland areas, clearly there was a major positive impact. So this is what I'm trying to say. That's what policy has to be reworked, you know, and adjusted according to the particular context of this livelihood system.
But within Penha, the network that you set up in 1989, have you got some groups that are self-generated, that have come up from the grassroots and have said, can we join Penha?
No, we operate as a catalyst, you know. Yeah. Catalyst for the government. For example, you have luckily people you know, and you go to the ministries and talk to them. Then, for example, in Ethiopia, to give you one of the articles in the Federal Constitution, it says that the land rights of the nomadic people should be, I forgot the number of the article, but it says, in theory, this is fantastic, you know, land rights of pastoralist people should be perpetuity. Yeah, this is, and that's what we use sometimes as the basis, you know, okay, look, this is, and then what we do is a lot of networking, policy advocacy. The good thing is also when you are a regional organization from 7-8 countries, you know, the Sudanese can come to Ethiopia and say something about the situation and vice versa, you know. You know, that's a very nice way. I just learned this trick, you know, because people sometimes, if I was in my home, I'm from Eritrea, by the way, I wouldn't be even saying half of what I'm saying now, you know, to be honest with you. I'm honest with you. But I go to Kenya, Sudan, and Ethiopia, I can say a bit more, you know. And then people will not get the same level of offense. The same for Ethiopia. And when you are regional, you know, you open up. You also have a common interest. The things I talked about, cross-border trade, reconciliation, peacemaking, you know. So that's why we, in our logo, we don't even have the countries in the maps, you know. We don't have just a block of countries, you know. A region, sure, I don't, those maps, I didn't make them earlier. They're official maps, but I think the region has commonality, you know, ecological, political, social. So it doesn't deny the sovereignty of the countries, but I think we should open up, you know. We should be much more open.
Well done.
So, thank you.
I'm going to call... Very grateful to the head of school, Professor Simon Mortimer, for joining us tonight. We're very grateful to Andrew, but I'm going to invite the chairman of the TAI International, who is a graduate of Reading, Dr. Paul Harding, to say an official vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Yes, as John said, I'm also a graduate of Reading. I did my PhD here some years ago. I just wanted, if you wouldn't mind, just to spend 2 minutes just talking about the Tropical Agriculture Association International, TAA International. We've been around for more than 40 years as TAA, but now we're relaunching ourselves, we're refocusing, we're rejuvenating ourselves, and we're renaming ourselves as TAA International. We've just launched our new website, and I'd invite you to go and look at it. It's TAA-international.org. TAA-international.org. It's 8:30 at night. There's lots of you still here. You're still asking intelligent questions. You're just the sort of people we want to invite to join TAA International. We have always welcomed members from countries all around the world. But the truth is, for the first 40 years, we had the majority of our members were UK citizens.
We've always had members from all around the world, but most were from the UK. We want to reverse that. We're particularly keen now to attract members, young, active members such as yourself, particularly from developing countries. So please go and have a look on our website. There's lots of interesting information there. Of course, we're still evolving it, we're still developing, we're still putting things on it, but there's still lots of information there. There's a whole archive of our journal, our technical journal, Agriculture for Development. They're all there in an archive you can look at. There are new benefits, such as if you become a member, we have an accreditation scheme, so you can apply to become a member or a fellow of TAAI. We have a mentoring scheme. We have social media accounts that we're trying to rejuvenate. We're looking for volunteers to manage some of those social media accounts. We have a page for job vacancies. We have special pages for universities. We've got all kinds of ideas. So please go and have a look, and feel free to give us feedback, any comments, any suggestions. There's a contact us. Just click on that, and you can send us any comment, and we will reply to you. And if you want to, you can join online very easily. If you're a student, or if you're under 40, or if you're a citizen of a developing country, it's only £10 a year. Remember. And you, as I say, there are various benefits you will get for that £10. So please, I will invite you to do that. That's all I want to say. It's the end of the advert. What I'm really here for is to say a few words of thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank the University of Reading Department of Agriculture for co-hosting this annual lecture. I'd particularly like to thank Professor Mortimer at the back and Dr. Andrew here, who helped with the technology, and I think Baz, isn't it? Yes. Thank you for the real expertise. Yes, thank you. And most of all, I'd like to thank you all, of course, for coming and for your very useful contributions. But most of all, I'd like to thank Professor Fre. It's really good to see a humble professor. He says this in joke, but he really is. He's a humble professor, and I think that really helps.